I think the government are worried that some employers are taking advantage, whether that's use of workers who don't have a right to work here, or underpayments or exploitation.
So what does it mean for organisations that still see HR and payroll as very separate worlds?
I think it's increasingly difficult for those organisations, and they're having areas of coverage that they just are missing. Increasingly, payroll data is critical. And I'd even said 20 years ago, HR data and payroll data were not the same thing. So I think they're looking at the same hill, but they're at different sides. So the object on the hill looks to be the opposite or different.
Keeping businesses thriving, compliance and safe, forecasting strategy, it's all on our mind. It's time payroll took its place in the boardroom to shine.
Managing a global team is complex, but Deel makes it simpler with payroll, HR, IT, and compliance all in one place. That's why over 35,000 businesses trust Deel to hire, pay, and manage their teams worldwide. See how Deel works at deel.com/nickday. That's DEEL.com/NICKDAY. Deel, your forever people platform. Hello and welcome back to the Payroll Podcast. Now, what if I told you that the rules of employment, pay, and data sharing are starting to collide? And payroll is right at the center of it. Today, we're going to talk about exactly where HR ends and payroll begins, the hidden shift that's reshaping compliance, data, and pay. Now, if you're new to the show, welcome. Please do remember to click subscribe, follow if you're watching us on YouTube. But most importantly, if you can, and you've enjoyed today's episode, share this with all of your payroll colleagues and friends. And together we can really raise the profile of payroll worldwide. My name is Nick Day. I'm the host of this show. I'm also the CEO of JGA Recruitment Group. We're a specialist payroll recruitment agency. And today I'm joined by one of the most respected minds in UK payroll, although he may not like me saying it, Mr. Simon Parsons. Simon is someone I know really, really well. He's definitely a payroll thought leader, a data advocate, a compliance expert, and he's on more boards and institutions and advisory committees than you can possibly count. He's also a fellow panelist for me on a wonderful show that we like to host once a month called Payroll Question Time. And most importantly, he has decades of experience guiding the evolution of payroll legislation and technology in the UK. He's also the creator and managing editor behind payadvice.uk, a wonderful resource. If you're not familiar with it, I will put a link in the show notes. And I would say he's one of the most trusted sources for payroll and employment law updates anywhere in the UK. So I'm really privileged to have him with me today. He's also got a wicked sense of humour, a good friend, and I'm delighted to welcome Simon Parsons to the Payroll Podcast. How are you doing, Simon?
Yeah, pretty good. So thanks for welcoming me today. I've come with a Barry White voice. Is that a little bit of the Yorkshire humour you're expecting? So I've just gone down with a little bit of cold. So if I start crooning halfway through, you'll know why.
Well, usually we start our payroll question times with competitions of who has the most experience, and every time you make me feel young. So maybe we'll get there in just a moment. But we're going to be talking today about how HR employment law is morphing into payroll calculation and data sharing. A really interesting subject, not something we've tackled before on the show. Before we do, though, I'm going to ask you a question I ask everyone that comes on, and I've asked you this before when you joined me last time in 2021. But what does the word payroll mean to you?
Good question. So payroll, to me, it's an element of excitement. I think before I've even said it can be a little bit sexy. Maybe I'm a bit strange in that respect. I have a little bit of a background that goes a long way. My mum and dad actually met in the Army Pay Corps during World War II. They were both, my mother was conscripted into the Women's Royal Auxiliary Corps, and my father volunteered. He actually volunteered for the RAF, but the only job they give him was a batman. He wanted to fly, but he was blind in his left eye. So he then volunteered for the Army. He was actually exempt from call-up because he worked for the Admiralty in the London port. But he volunteered for the Army and was a crack shot during training, so he could shoot anything at any distance. But because he was blind in one eye, they put him in the Army Pay Corps in Lancashire.
Wow, I did not know that. I've been working on with you for like 2 years on Payroll Question Time, and never has this come up. I think this should have been included in your years of experience. I thought you were going to say you've been doing payroll since World War II. Well, you don't look that old, almost. Simon.
It's in the DNA. So, I mean, payroll is critical to UK PLC, isn't it? If we weren't paid, why would we bother turning up? And we'd really lose our enthusiasm for our jobs if we didn't get the pay packet to pay the bills.
I agree. I would say that payroll is manages the most important exchange, which is the exchange of dignity for time, because payroll is effectively what allows us to pay for the things we need, whether that's paying for our care home fees for our parents or school shoes for our kids. We expect to get paid for the time we put into the employers that take us on, and if we don't get that right, then we don't feel we have that ability to be dignified in our outside of work pursuits, and it all becomes a bit of a challenge. So we manage that element of trust, which I think is super important. But something I really want to talk about today, which is you've said, so I want to bring this up, and we can go anywhere you like today, Simon, so no holds barred. But you said that employment law and payroll are becoming increasingly intertwined. We've talked about this a lot on Payroll Question Time as well. What do you think is driving that convergence?
I think the risk of I'm trying to see how I explain this, Nick. I think the government are worried that some employers are taking advantage, whether that's use of workers who don't have a right to work here, or underpayments or exploitation. So they've talked about in terms of flexible arrangements that are one-sided only. And quite often they're explained away as being available to both. These are for the benefit of the employee, but increasingly, I think in this government consider that actually they're not, and the previous. So because some of these things started with the prior Conservative Party government, it's the extent that they've been removing one-sided flexibility for some time.
What do you think then is, I'm obviously going to get too political, what do you think the driving force behind that? Because you must have some hypothesis as to why we're taking that level of direction.
Well, I kind of go back to probably my school days when I did commerce as a subject and did very well in it. But there's an element of making profit is usually off people. So if you don't pay the people, how are you going to make the profit? Because you've got no one to sell to. So there's all this cycle. But I think there's been increasingly a view of business trying to cut their costs, in case directed towards employees, to grow. But it's actually the employees that behind the goods, aren't they? They're all part of the cycle of economy. So it doesn't work.
I thought it was quite interesting. I read a stat recently, and I'm probably going slightly off piste. I'll bring it back in a moment. But I read a stat recently where they said that over 14,000 millionaires have since left the UK following the recent budget and all the changes that have had, which I think was more than double the amount of millionaires that had left in the preceding 2 years, so in 23 and 24. I mean, obviously not all the way through 2025 yet. And I think some of the repercussions we don't always consider in relation to payroll. These are entrepreneurs that obviously contribute significantly through their own payroll processes, but also through their businesses to get to a certain stage. Often these are business millionaires that are leaving who also employ people. But obviously we know the revenue collects a huge amount of its treasury through the payroll process, through national insurance contributions, through the corporate contributions we make as well. So I do find it sometimes quite interesting, the whole cycle that you talk about, because everything kind of influences the next thing. So what's next? What do we need to be prepared for? What do organizations need to be prepared for, as well as we've got a budget coming up in the next month or so as well?
Well, I think we've gone through a period of time where rights have been established and put in place, but the ability to enforce them has been quite poor or difficult for people to do. So there's a lot of employment law rights which can only be enforced by, in effect, suing the employer. But do people have the resources or time or effort or ability to do that? And so, to a certain extent, there's been an ability to ignore an element of employment rights on the basis that the risk is quite low. But with the move with the Fair Work Agency, that risk changes, because now you've got an enforcement body who'll potentially come in and make you do it. Whereas before, it was worth the risk, wasn't it? Because half of them wouldn't sue you because they wouldn't be able to. I don't know. It's difficult times.
And also the courts are really backlogged as well, which again puts you off doing something. So what does it mean for organizations that still see HR and payroll as very separate worlds? And I say this both through my recruiter lens, really, and what I'm seeing in the industry. My personal belief is that we need to be collaborating more with HR. We're seeing a convergence between professions now where people are often working in roles that involve HR, payroll, and reward. There's a convergence of those industries. But for the organizations to still see them as very separate, what are the ramifications of that? Why might that be dangerous, or is it dangerous?
I think it's increasingly difficult for those organizations, and they're having areas of coverage that they just are missing. So traditionally, you've got the old tales of the middle class, upper class, lower class. Where did payroll sit? And maybe those were a bit jokey and not serious. The other aspect, I guess, is HR people could tend to be a bit extrovert, and payroll people a little introvert, and they mixed very well. I think that's changing, mind you, Nick. I think there's increasingly more an extrovert payroll senior management group out there these days that are fighting their corner, as it were. But there was an element of, 20, 30 years ago, HR did their thing. Payroll just received details of what to pay, calculate tax, national insurance. That was it. But back in 2011, going back to that sort of time when pension AE came in, there was an element of payroll had to do something, and then there was this sort of preparation stuff around decision making, communication, making assessments, which kind of brought, I'd suggest, HR people into an uncomfortable place for them, because they could no longer pat someone on the back and make them feel good or tell them they're out of a job, but actually had to deal with some real data, some real analysis. And so you can see this sort of clash. Now, I make it all sound very black and white, and of course it's all really grey and mixed and never as I say it, but hopefully it gives a feeling of the challenges that go. But that's increased. So it's ever increasing, and it's increasing more.
So I'll say it's interesting because I think the one thing we talk about now that we didn't talk about back even in 2011 for sure, I think certainly post-pandemic we talk about it a lot now. In fact, it's hard to have a conversation where it doesn't come in, which is the employee experience. Now, I would argue that back in 2010 and those kind of times, we would attribute the employee experience responsibility to be much more in the realm of HR. Whereas now, of course, the payslip holding the power that it does, that promise, that exchange of dignity for time, if you like, but also the relationship between an accurate payslip and retention of staff, and the ability that payroll has now with advancements in technology to deliver really accurate analytics and reports that can really move the needle in terms of a company's ability to attract and retain its staff as well as other metrics it can do. I think that's been part of the convergence as well. It's payroll has all this data that can really move the needle at an organizational level. I think it's kind of left HR handling things like when an employee sues an employer. That's not with payroll. They're kind of handling those employee issues, which are often issues now rather than that positive extroverted stuff. And I think it's given payroll an opportunity to be that positive influence on the experience. That opportunity to say, hey, we can really help our employees. We can give them different, flexible ways to be paid. We can look at benefits utilizations and reward strategies. We can use that data to enhance the way that we offer our remuneration packages. And I think there's a lot of, I read a LinkedIn report which said 68% of CHROs rely on payroll data now for their DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And I think, again, it's a really good example of where payroll now is much more closely aligned with what we would traditionally call an HR-based activity. Have you seen similar things, or am I off mark?
No, I think you're absolutely on mark. So increasingly, payroll data is critical. And I'd even said 20 years ago, HR data and payroll data were not the same thing. And they're hilltop views. So I think they're looking at the same hill, but they're at different sides. So the object on the hill looks to be the opposite or different. So there certainly used to be theoretical arguments between HR and payroll, because HR was about what should have happened and payroll was about what did happen. And they weren't always the same. So the fact you're on salary and you would get £2,000 a month, that's an HR thought. So, but if there was a mistake and you only paid £1,800, and next time you paid 2,200, there was down to the payroll and HR just was not aligned. And I think there is still that data challenge. And I think that expands. So we've got so much more. So before, it probably didn't matter. Now it does. But there are differences and changes. And I think payroll people struggle with it to a certain extent, because payroll is this neat thing that performs calculations which are accurate. But the reality is modern payroll isn't as neat, and it's now having to calculate things which are subjective and have choice, and sort of tailored to the choices an employer have on their HR angle of whether they want to reward people or they want to get everything out of their employees for as little as they can. And they're so broad in what it does. And I'm not sure we've got a comfortable fit, and we need to move to that point. Some areas it is, but I think HR departments get very inventive. They're trying to retain and increase their employee retention by bringing in things that don't cost the employer money generally. So they're playing around with tax, national insurance implications. However, got to be careful what I say. They don't understand the tax and NI implication. But for the payroll people do. And it's a question of, have they talked about it? Have they actually discussed how this is going to work? And I'm not sure the communication is really there. And I think sometimes when you go to things like Myers-Briggs personality profiling, some of those personalities struggle with each other. However, the other aspect of Myers-Briggs is the brilliant group is a mixture of personalities that, when they work as a team, get a better result than any individual in the team. And I think we struggle to understand the concepts of the team is better than an individual, and so we tend to play with hierarchies. And I think they're still there, but we've got a lot that's come in. So we had pension AE. You've got Office of National Statistics reporting, you've got gender pay gap reporting, you've got holiday pay, national minimum wage. There's a whole list of things that are come into play that require payroll and HR activity, because payroll don't set hours of work, what happens if someone's late, what happens with the manager, whether he gives overtime or not. It just wants to know, what do you want me to pay? But increasingly these days, it's critical that they both know what each other's doing, because for a compliant business, they need to work together. And I think on the whole, they're not.
I think it's interesting. I'm going to sound really bad here, so I'll make a little plug for a book I've got coming out. But I think we're in a period called, what I call the payroll pivot. I think there's a moment now where payroll is responsible for making sure, and always has been, that employees get paid what they deserve for the wherever it is they work. And HR's responsibility is making sure they're comfortable in that place while they earn it. So that's why you're seeing increasingly in the world of HR, senior kind of projects now very much around inclusivity, belonging, organizational design. And obviously, payroll has a part to play in some of those things, in the way we get paid and making sure things are equal and fair. Whereas on the payroll side now, it's about giving flexible opportunity for the way that we're remunerated in terms of how that's perceived, making sure that's accurate across borders, if you want to be based in a different location. And there's loads of other elements that have really come into play. And I think going back, payroll used to be just about, and this is very much your background as well, that compliance, and it still is about compliance, but making sure people are paid accurately, on time and compliantly. But with the emergence of technology at the same time as these changes, that's almost just table stakes now for payroll. So payroll needs to be able to do more if we want to keep ourselves relevant. And I think they are doing more, which is why we've had this sort of move towards the employee experience piece. Well, automation takes up the heavy lifting. Payroll can be more strategic. You can start diving into some of that that data and giving more of that value back. And I think that's, for me, why it's really exciting, this era of payroll now, this payroll pivot period of going, actually, how do we reinvent ourselves in a really strategic and intelligent way? I think the word strategic is used probably too much, but ultimately I think it's, how do we reinvent this industry? And I think it's doing so very cleverly, very quickly, without everyone really sitting down, understanding what we're doing to do it. But people are adapting very fast to the technologies that are coming into play, which is really exciting. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I think we need that. We need the two departments working together to make sure employees don't just earn what they should, but they feel very comfortable doing it, and using that data then to make sure that we can continue to offer evolutionary packages and remuneration opportunities for people to get paid what they're worth and keep their retention levels high.
Yeah, I think leadership in business has generally changed. I think there were leaders out there before, but I think leadership tended to be an element of do what I tell you to. Yes, and I think there's an element of that's one of the downsides sometimes of the extrovert type personalities. You actually want to take control, but some of the benefits of extrovert personalities is actually, and it's is actually you can lead people to get the best out of them, so that you're not controlling them, you're actually growing them and getting them the team to work, and I think that's not necessarily seen so much. Sometimes I think people go out with good intention of that's what they want their team to be, and then tell them exactly what they were going to do, which doesn't really work. There's an element of taking the skills and the experience and really harnessing it for the future of that business.
Now, I'm going to throw a quote back at you that you've given to me on the Payroll Question Time show, Simon. But you've spoken a lot about, and I use your words, the maze of misinformation, which is a sentence I quite liked. I've used it a couple of times, particularly in relation to payroll and employment law. And obviously, we're talking now about this convergence with HR. So what are some of the common myths that you see circulating? I know you're very active on social media forums, and I should just say, if you ever have a payroll challenge, you'll find Simon on pretty much every platform helping people very, very selflessly across different payroll challenges and questions. But what's the real truth behind it?
Well, yeah, we're in a strange time. I think in the 1800s we had the burst of the railways, and a lot of them just had no chance of ever making anything. So lots of people lost money. Saying that, was railways a bad idea? I think the answer is no. If we go back or come forward significantly to the future, we had our tech bubble where everything was wonderful in tech. But actually that burst, that doesn't mean that tech is totally out, because some tech is good. But there were imitators, or I'm trying to think of a suitable word to use it other than fraudsters, that sort of came and merged into the market to take advantage of the fact that there was money around. And I think sometimes we still have that a little bit. And again, I'm describing it in very 0-100 terms. And the reality is it's not. It's probably 30-70 or 70-30, the other way around. It's never clear what it is. But we do find a number of schemes being promoted which cause alarm bells in my head to say, this isn't really quite true. They're pulling the wool over your eyes to take advantage of a need that we have. And we can see that generally in the amount of fraud that's committed against people. So you've got organisations out there now contacting pensioners about the fact that they can now claim their winter fuel allowance if they contact them and provide their details. And it's all a lie, because they're going to get that from the government anyway. So there's an element of it's increasingly hard to tell who's telling the truth and who's not these days. Is that spreading into payroll and HR? I think a little bit it is. And so I think equally, chatting the other month with a technician at the launch of the Payroll Week, National Payroll Week at the up in Sky Gardens, was anticipation of an AI bubble burst. AI is brilliant, but I think there are lots of pretenders out there as well. So what is it it's trying to fix and do? And I think there's an element of there's great scope, but tend to find that some have already made up their mind what it's going to achieve without actually experimenting on what it can achieve. And I think some companies will go bust. They'll just go bust. But others will really thrive and do well. And it's just understanding and trying to see which horse do you back.
Yeah, no, it's hard to disagree with anything you've just said. I think in the world of AI, there are so many opportunities that everyone's trying to offer everything, and we're still trying to figure out which ones are going to last, the test of time. There will be some elements of AI in our process where we go, actually, now we can't live without it. There'll be others which come and go, and you realize it was great looking at the bells and whistles, but do I actually need it? Has this actually made my life easier for the cost that I'm paying? And it'll slowly start to find its feet, I think, over time. Interestingly, something came to mind when you were talking about the when there's a need, there's something to be sold. And you and I have had a few debates on the show around earned wage access. And of course, it used to be early wage access, which was a slightly different process. And you and I have talked about the dissolution of the monthly pay cycle. I believe it's going to happen. I think it's inevitable from my perspective with the Gen Zs and millennials looking for everything instantly. I think I talked about the SD Works talk recently, the idea that you can now split a restaurant bill 7 ways using 3 different apps whilst ordering an Uber. It's kind of really used to this kind of technology doing everything for us instantly. And I think the idea of having money trapped in a pay cycle, for me, seems relatively old-fashioned. However, I'm going to caveat this with, when we first started talking about this together, I think back in probably 2020, 2021, maybe even earlier than that, there were a lot of people saying this was available and out there, and it wasn't a loan, it wasn't anything else. And of course, at that time, that wasn't necessarily accurate, I would probably say. And I don't know how it necessarily works now, and you're probably more knowledgeable than me, but I think it's a good example of something which there's a real need for it for those that certainly need access to their funds earlier for whatever reason, they're on the breadline. But we've got to make sure that it's done in a way that, is really looking after the employee. And I think one example I'd give is a lot of these firms charge quite a lot to access those funds early. And if you're accessing £10 early and you're being charged £1.50 for that withdrawal, that's actually quite a high interest. But I'm going to ask you again. We last talked about this in 2021 on the podcast. I'm going to ask you now that the technology's moved on, the service has moved on. Where do you now sit on the earned wage access situations? I think there's a convergence there with HR as well.
Yeah. Well, I think the government have clarified some of the positions, because some of the fears actually found to be true, that actually if you're actually paying earned wages, it's subject to tax and national insurance. But the HMRC have relaxed that after ministerial pressure, so they don't treat it that way. But I think I'm with you. So I don't see a problem with it. I just think it sometimes pretends to be something it isn't. And it isn't wages from work, because the employer actually hasn't paid a penny. So it is unregulated credit, as described by the FCA in one of their reports. You could say that means it's okay because it doesn't have to be regulated. That's why it's unregulated. But it is an advance. And we used to have salary advances in the 50s, 60s. You go and get a sub from the pay office from your employer and they'd knock it off. And that's in effect what it is. But as you're saying, Nick, some of the fees in the early days were $3.90 a transaction. And it used to be, and now we're saying they're $1.50. But the statistics that sometimes support some of these schemes is, well, it's beneficial to the employee because they can take £20 out 5 days before payday. It costs them £1.50, and you think 5 days, £1.50 on 20 quid. You're saying that's the average statistics. That's a very high percentage. There's an element of they'd been better going into an overdraft, or something like that, or other arrangement with their bank. And that was actually the FCA's points originally in the early days. I think they've adapted. Some of the players have gone. So they've disappeared. So that bubble sort of burst a little bit. You're left with a few. And increasingly, I'm seeing that employers fund it.
Which is the way I think it should be done. Yeah, I'm fully behind it. And I think this is where it gets difficult. Sorry to cut you off, because I don't think there's enough clarity yet around the statistics that are being published, because there's so many stats out there. It's hard to know whether these stats relate to people that have to pay for those withdrawals, or whether these stats relate to when the employer pays. And I do think there's a difference. So, but for me, I think it absolutely should be an employer paid for opportunity. That's my personal belief, and not everyone will agree with me on that. But I do think that there's a separate research done by Deloitte, which admittedly is not just about EWS, but employment wellness programs. But they say that for every £1 invested, companies tend to see a £4.70 return. And that's because the return is found not necessarily in profit in the simple sense. It's returned in improvements in absenteeism, improvements in presenteeism, and these elements where rather than coming to work, I'll give an example. If I'm overdrawn, I've got I think you said 5 days a minute ago to go until my payday, and it's Sunday night and I'm already overdrawn, am I bringing my best self to work on Monday? Probably not. There's going to be several hours or minutes of every working day in between where I'm going to be worrying a little bit about my financial situation. So I think with that investment, of course, you get better productivity and you reduce those other elements which are costing the economy. I think last time I checked, it was like 51 billion a year in presenteeism and absenteeism, which is a significant sum.
Attention payroll leaders. If you're listening to this, you already know that payroll has never been more complex. Compliance risks are rising, skilled talent is scarce, and getting it wrong can cost your business way more than just money. It can cost you trust, retention, and of course, brand reputation. I'm Nick Day, host of this show and also CEO of JGA Recruitment Group, specialist global payroll recruiters. Here at JGA, we're so passionate about payroll, we've even turned it into music. Don't believe us? Head to your favorite audio platform and search for Payroll Powers the World, and you can quite literally join us in song about how we believe payroll deserves its moment in the boardroom to shine. At JGA, we'd like to think our passion shines through to our recruitment results as well. With a 97% retention rate and an average 19-day job brief to hire success rate, we work fast, we work strategically, and we work with purpose to connect you to the hidden payroll talent that job ads and direct search methods will simply never reach. So if you're hiring or indeed planning to hire, why not partner with the experts that are shaping the future of payroll? Partner with jgarecruitment.com today, or better yet, drop me a message directly, and together we can make sure your next payroll hire is your best one yet.
Well, that's where you could say, well, where is the future? Because I think some see EWA as the future, or of payroll. Is it? I was wondering if actually the future of payroll is any day pay. So you can actually choose your payday, just in the same way you can choose when you pay your mortgage. Now, does that mean that people will select to pay every day? I'm not sure if that's true. I'm not sure if they will. They'll select pay when they're needing it or when there are big bills coming up. But there's elements of, could you actually get your real wages, account for your tax and national insurance on that day? Now, that may be scary to a lot of payroll managers. They'll want the old pay cycle to maintain because it sets their work pattern, etc. But technology this day gives the ability for any day pay. I mean, I tend to say that SD Works Payroll Engine Active Technology is transactional. So if you send it a piece of data now, it'll calculate the tax and national insurance now. Now, I'll say our customer base, how do they operate that? They take advantage of the fact it's transactional, and then they pay once a month.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's very rare you say something doesn't make sense, even if I challenge you on it, Simon. You have that gravitas and that experience behind it, which certainly helps. Let me ask us, we've kind of touched upon it. Sorry if you've got something to add. I was going to ask.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've done the master's degree, Nick, so there's an element of, we all have our personal bias, but I think it's valued to listen to alternate views, because that even goes back to the Myers-Briggs principle of that's how you get the right answer. If we all said the same thing, we'd probably have the wrong answer. But if we say different things and we consider them and come out with an answer, that's probably going to be better.
Yeah, it's like if we don't have any payroll errors, then we don't ever know what real good looks like, right? You need to have the bad, the yin and the yang on both sides. And I think it's a salient point. We're talking a little bit about compliance. I'm going to take us back there for a moment, because where do you think UK businesses are in terms of compliance when it relates to employment rights, pay transparency, which is something now which is right at the top of the agenda? I think that comes into the payroll remit increasingly now as well. And of course, data accuracy and security. Now, I should preface this slightly with the fact that I haven't yet mentioned that you are on the Irene board, which is a systems. Well, I'll let you describe the boards and the advisory committees that you're on, because I know you've got a lot of experience across many facets of payroll, not just compliance. So maybe you can bring that to light for us as well. But keen to see where, how compliant you think UK businesses really are across those kind of areas.
Well, tax is fairly good. Sometimes when I see international employment handling, I think it's a little bit dodgy, because I think you have people making it up, but on the basis that the end of year self-assessment will bring it out all in the wash, so it doesn't really matter. But there are approved methods of operation. I think a proportion, maybe 20%, are doing it via some other made-up scheme. So national insurance is fairly solid. But again, I see lots of inaccuracy with directors handling, probably because they're trying to avoid it in some way and want to do something else and don't like it. So on those sorts of things, statutory sick pay, statutory maternity pay, I think generally it's good, it's high. There are some players out there who'll try and avoid it still. And increasingly, it's a risk, isn't it? Because you'll be potentially up for discrimination cases, and that may increase under the FWA when it's launched even more. And you've got that challenge even now with the statutory payments group of HMRC who will enforce now. I think it just varies, but on other things, it's really poor. So I think the things that's really poor are holiday pay rights. There's still 2 million people who the government estimate are being denied their holiday pay rights. The method of operation is poor.
Wow. As you mentioned, there's a few. So what else alongside holiday pay?
Yeah, well, we've got another 491 after the 512, was it, at the beginning of the year? 491 named employers who have breached national minimum wage law. I think the challenge here, Nick, again, is going back to the beginning. You have elements of employment law, HR practice, business practice, now overlaying with much more than it used to, with payroll activity and result. And the two need to see each other to understand what the employer is doing wrong. But I bet most of those 491 employers, a few of them would have been acting deliberately, wouldn't have thought they were breaching national minimum wage law. And some will claim they're not either. They were just caught on some technicality or other. But they've all paid penalties of 100 or 200%. And that list doesn't even name all of those that have not understood salary sacrifice arrangements. So it's very difficult. How did you want me to cover some of those other groups that I'm involved with, Nick? Because I'm chat about.
Well, I probably should have asked you at the beginning of the show, to be fair. This is my bad hosting skills. But because I know you so well, I think it'd be good for our audience that perhaps aren't so familiar to understand just the level of, I think, to give you kudos where it's due, the level of commitment you give to this industry, because it's not just as a practitioner for an employer. You go above and beyond. You've got the website I mentioned earlier, Pay Advice website, which is brilliant. And I'll put a link in the show notes. But you are active on all the social forums. You're also active on a number of committees that, let's be fair, really do and are positioned to help progress payroll forward, to make sure we are more compliant, to plug the gaps in system issues, to help, with government consultations and other things. And not everyone gets to know that there are, people like yourself behind the scenes doing this work. And I think it's important for me to give an opportunity to amplify it, but also, so they know they've got a credible person behind the scenes working for them that they may not known before. So, if you can bring us up to speed with some of the things you're involved with, I think it'd be nice.
Yeah, sure. So I joined what was Centrefile in 1984. I have left there for a little period of time. I did missionary work for 2 years, and I worked for Cyborg for a year. But apart from that, my life has been here, and that's more from Centrefile to Ceridian to SD Works. And SD Works now, as I understand it, is the largest payroll supplier in Europe. It's generally by acquisition, because we keep on taking over companies. We're not necessarily the largest in the UK, but across the whole of Europe we are. And as part of that, I kind of volunteered. So I did the diploma in payroll management in the mid-90s, if I put it that, early 90s. I actually went to do the fast track at the University of Westminster the first year. They cancelled it because there were probably only two of us. So I then ended up having to do the 2-year diploma course, which I did. And then the Master of Science came along, and I did the Master of Science. But I got myself involved because my background is IT, Nick. Law reads like code to me. Payroll is just mathematics. That's up my street. So it's process and mathematics, really. So that just fits my brain style. So I go along to what was known as the British Computer Society Payroll Specialist Group fairly early on, when I was probably in my late 20s. And I'd see a silent group of developers who would listen to speakers from Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. In those days, it was Inland Revenue and the Department of Health and Social Security, about the changes that were coming up. And I was the idiot new boy, the questions, the stupid questions. And I learned that there is no stupid question. And I think I learned early on that if it is a stupid question, you can disguise a stupid question by telling them that it's your friend's question that you were just going to ask, but you think you already know the answer. But they had this stupid question. You're just wondering what their view was. And I think I found it worked. But the strange thing about that is, with all these experienced developers, is when the answer was given, they'd all be writing down furiously the answer. So after a while, I think I soon learned that it wasn't a stupid question. So got elected to the committee of the BCS PSG, or Payroll Specialist Group as it was then, Payroll Group now, and then got involved in the Moses project. It probably was at the time of Moses. That's in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, which was the modernization of, and I should remember where it was, but I can't, but it's the HMRC IT systems, the precursor of RTI, and was on the RTI task force. Occasionally I get people say to me, "Oh, so you're the reason why it's so bad." And I'd say, without me, you should have seen what it would have been like, because it would have been much worse.
Should have seen the other guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But consequently, Joan Woods of HMRC Software Development Support Team formed Irene with the users, and I became the chair of Irene. I think because I was 20 minutes late for a meeting in Shipley, turned up in the office, and they said, "Oh, by the way, Simon, we've appointed you as the chair of Irene."
So what does Irene stand for, just so our listeners are clear?
Originally, it was the Inland Revenue Electronic Exchange Network. Humrakeen doesn't sound so good, so we've retained the Irene name. And we haven't got a song about Humrakeen, but we've got the song "Come On Irene." So
fair enough. I don't think I'll be writing any songs about Humrakeen. Yeah, that's pretty good. No. That's pretty good. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's fitting to bring it up because you've given a lot of your time, and actually, again, bigging you up a little bit here, Simon, because I have a huge amount of admiration and respect for what you do. But not just payroll. You mentioned there very quickly that you did 2 years of missionary work. I also know that you were a referee, which I know is a voluntary thing that you did for many, many years. You're also, I believe, very heavily involved with the Scouts Association, if I got that correctly.
I chair the scouting for the city of Peterborough. So all of the groups, I'm the chair of the trustee board.
Yeah, look, these are very selfless things that you do, and I think it's right to have the opportunity to celebrate them and say, hey, look, you've got a great person on the show, and Payroll is full of these hidden, skilled, committed individuals that I'm very fortunate that this gives me a platform to showcase those for the people that may not know. And a lot of really good people doing great work behind the scenes. Bringing it back slightly, I want to take it back to innovation. How can organizations make sure that their pay and bends innovations, which are a lot coming in, we talked about a couple already today, don't accidentally create new compliance or data sharing risks? Because that's something we've discussed a couple of times on PQT as well.
Yeah, I think they just need to be a little bit cautious. If something's too good to be true, it probably is. The adage is fairly accurate. So there's an element of check. Or I tend to use a lot of the sort of woodwork and adage, measure twice, cut once. So it's check. And don't check with the supplier. Check independent of the supplier, because If they want to sell you something, they'll tell you whatever they like. And how accurate is that? In fact, I was shown some materials from journalists from the Financial Times the other day who have been helping out on an article where some of the terminology used in the sales material is just backwards. For example, they'd use the term net pay arrangement for a net pay deduction, whatever that is. I don't know, because deductions are usually before you get to net pay. But it means completely the opposite. It's an HMRC term, which means it's pre-tax, and they were using it in the context of after tax. So it just shouted out to me that these people don't know what they're talking about. But I understand that because I've dealt with these terms for years and years. People that they're selling to have got no clue what they're talking about, and that they're not saying they're silly people or don't have the capacity to understand. I think there's a lot of hoodwinking going along, and I don't. I find that disturbing a little bit. And there's an element of, is there an underlying reason? And of course, there is a little bit, because they want their commission and they want their sale. But in payroll and HR, I think a fundamental principle is honesty. And I'd like to see more of it. And I'm not sure we're seeing that at the moment. I think there, as some people might say, some fake news that's out there, fake schemes, pretense. And that goes along also, Nick, with the fact that HMRC have named over 200 tax avoidance schemes promoted. And there's more, because that's just the ones that they've come to a conclusion with. There'll be more out there. So it's an element of, don't believe what you're told initially. And sometimes it's go and check with a competent professional who really knows what they're talking about. And that might not be a barrister, because we've had a barrister named on the stop list.
Yeah, I know. Actually, you've talked about there was a report last week where a company which had very much payroll in the name of the brand, single person entity. I think he's just been convicted and jailed for a number of fraudulent activities, and it does happen. Sometimes we can think, because there's payroll in a brand name, that they must be trustworthy and all the other things. It's not to say that 99.9% of them are, but it's worth doing your due diligence like you would in anything else. And as you say, they may direct you to people that are already on a affiliate commission or something else. I think this is quite useful in the lens I have. We're completely agnostic, and I deal with people that deal with these solutions. And if I've never heard of it, I'd always say, well, look, I can't give you an honest appraisal on this one and what I've heard, because I've never heard of it before. And that might be a red flag in itself. And when we're speaking to hundreds of payroll leaders globally about, every single day. But I think you make some really good and important points. I was trying to think about how I'd market recruitment in a way that might bamboozle, by saying that I sort of think about this. I help organizations transform their operations by transitioning human capital from one corporate entity to another corporate entity. You can add all the words. Essentially, I do recruitment. We can make it sound more complicated than it is. And I think where there's fear involved, and fear is always going to be involved when we're worried about paying our employees, and when we're talking about huge sums of money, sometimes 60 to 80% of our operational expense, companies are going to get bamboozled by words they don't understand if they're fearful of it. So I think this is some of the services you provide is making some of those terms clear and giving clarity so people can make better and more informed decisions.
Well, I think old-fashioned accounting has its place. So there's an element of a good old accountant. I'm going to say that my brother's an FCA. My father was a chartered secretary after leaving the war. So company secretary for businesses. So into accounts is you've got to make the numbers work. Sometimes I think numbers are produced, but are they real? And I'm not sure. So it's prove it through. Does it work? And I think sometimes we're sold on a bottom line figure that's going to really make a business profitable. Is that true? Test it. Measure twice.
Measure twice, yeah. Cut once. Nice. Well, there's the 3 questions I have to ask. I should probably ask all my guests these 3 questions, but I particularly want to ask them to you. They can be as short as you like, and we'll get into the vault just after this section. But number one is, where do you think payroll should sit? Should it be under HR, finance, or on its own? Number two will be, what's your view on the chief payroll officer and whether or not that'll actually come to fruition or not in the near or distant future? And then the third question will be, how do you see the future of payroll 3 to 5 years from now? So I've given you all three in one go in case you wanted to combine them all, because there's a kind of correlation between the three. But there you go. Over to you.
Yeah, and it's a Friday afternoon as well, so that
it is. Yeah,
do the brain in after a difficult week.
Absolutely.
Sure. Chief payroll officer. Payroll is payroll to me. I think it's a layered, so it's a business layer. I think when I did the Master of Science on business structures, there is an element of having a cross group working as opposed to the silo structure, and it still appeals to me. So does it fit in HR? It can do. Does it fit in finance? It can do. Does it fit on its own? It can do. I think all three are actually valid. However, what tends to happen is HR controls, finance controls, and there's an element of the balance in relation to payroll activity needs to be better focused. So rather than it being a do as you're told, it becomes a what can you bring to our table to improve the business?
So let me finish then with the third point, or the third part is, where do you see the future 3 to 5 years?
The future, I think it's a little bit confused. I think we're going to be taken over a lot by some government change. But my hope for the future, but I've got to say it was my hope 15 years ago, is that actually payroll catches up with the modern tech approach of, well, I'll call it pay on demand. I don't think it's pay on demand. I think it's real time instruction. And a lot of that has been achieved in some of the cloud-based engines these days. It is real time. Our problem is I don't think our working is real time yet. I don't think we've geared up for it. Banking has, insurance has, other things have, leisure has. There's all sorts of things that you can do on your apps right now and get instant service. Can we do that with payroll yet? So I'd like to see the future is that we become more modern in our application of business process and not so tied to a calendar of activity events.
Yeah, love that. What a great way to finish the show before the vault. And actually, this will be quite interesting then, because I think that last response will probably have an influence on the three short, sharp questions I'm going to ask you now in the vault. The first of this, one piece of advice you'd give to someone starting out in payroll today.
Well, the advice I tend to give is don't shy away from difficult things. Give it a go. Failure isn't a failure in the end, is it? If you learn from it, because it will lead to success. But I find that sometimes there's a tendency to avoid complexity. If you avoid complexity, you'll never become the expert. So expertise comes from giving it a go.
Love that. There's an acronym, FAIL, as first attempt in learning, and we don't win or lose, we win and learn. There you go. There's two cliches, but there's always something in a cliche. One thing you now know that you wish you'd known when you started your career?
The thing, I think it goes back to the last one a little bit, in is if your instinct tells you something's right, stick with it and push it diplomatically as best you can. And I think I learned that on the master's studies with the CIPP. Set your hypothesis and then challenge it. And I think in the early days, you felt that everybody else knew everything, all about it, and you were just there to listen and learn. And I think I learned fairly early on, probably in my late 20s, that actually no one else really knew much better. So it was worthwhile having a go, and you all grew together.
Very nice. And last but not least, you've got an option here. You can take option A or option B. Option A is if payroll was a movie, a song, or a book or something along those lines, what would it be? Or you can take option B, which is there a book, a resource, a quote, or a movie that's really inspired you throughout your own career? So option A or option B?
Oh, that's a difficult one. Yeah. I'm probably going to struggle with that a little bit. There are some movies that probably have inspired me. I'll name one recently, and you think it's quite extreme, but I think it's just having that resilience to just battle through, and that's the story of One Life in relation to the stockbroker that rescued the children from Prague and brought them back. And because he faced all sorts of obstacles in his life, and he just battled through and did it. Although I think he felt he was a failure, other people would look at what he did and think he was a great success. Does that help? I think
It
that
does.
sort of
It's quite a
aligns
powerful
here.
response for someone who didn't know what to say. And I think you've actually touched
Yes.
upon something else, which is very present in the world of payroll, which is the idea of feeling like imposters. We do all this work, but we don't necessarily feel like we deserve that success. And sometimes we've got to look back over a longer period. We often we're very ambitious in what we can achieve in 1 year, and we under predict what we can experience in 10. And we look back over a 10-year career, you realize how much influence or change you've been part of. And in your history, Simon, we're talking 40 years. So, there's been a huge influence there. And, hats off to you. I'm very excited and privileged to have had you on the show today. I know we meet regularly on Payroll Question Time, but it really does mean a lot for you to join me today on the Payroll Podcast. So thank you ever so much. Hopefully it's helped people understand the fusion between HR and payroll, where compliance now lives, and some of the challenges we have to face going forward. Challenges of real-time reporting, digital tax systems that are driving change, the importance of getting, IT literate, which I think you made very clear towards the end as well. The rise of misinformation, which is always worth looking at payroll forums, speaking to people outside of the people that maybe these vendors sometimes recommend, and what instant pay is and is not, and how the future might change. So listen, thank you ever so much. Been a real privilege. I've enjoyed every second. I could have you on the show every week, Simon. So thank you ever so much for joining me today. And I'll be seeing you again in a few weeks' time on Payroll Question Time, which I should do a little plug for. If people aren't familiar with the show, go to sdworks.co.uk/PQT. This is a monthly webinar, which Simon is one of the expert panel members. There's usually 4 or 5 panel members we have on the show. We'll answer all of your questions in real time about payroll. So if you've got something there you haven't asked before, tune in, join the webinar. You get the slides, whether or not you join the show or not, actually. But we get hundreds of people every month tuning in, and we help. I'd like to think we help keep the UK compliant with payroll and up to speed. So if you're not familiar with the show, but you listen to this regularly, go check it out. Otherwise, Simon, this leads me to say a huge thank you for joining me today on the Payroll Podcast.
It's been a pleasure.
Global teams are more connected today than ever, but managing payroll, HR, and IT can still feel fragmented. But Deel simplifies global work with one platform that keeps everything running smoothly. No compliance guesswork, no third-party payroll, just seamless operations backed by 24/7 expert support. That's why over 35,000 companies trust Deel to handle their global workforce. Visit deel.com/nickday to see how Deel can help. That's DEEL.com/NICKDAY. Deel, your forever people platform.